Welcome back to the podcast. Gabe, Giannis, and I, we are joined with Zeph Moore today, professional basketball trainer, husband, father, and man, this guy, his story, especially the story about towards the end of the podcast in China, dude, you guys have to listen to this. I really enjoyed this episode, Gabe. I didn't know Zeph before this, and it was awesome, man.
That's kind of what made this like a super unique episode and pretty special is like, you usually bring guests on that you have a really good relationship with. And there's a few that we've had on that like you have a good, close relationship with. And I know kind of very well as like an outsider from like social and the stuff they put out. But this was a really cool recommendation from Liz, our producer, for someone that has like a really interesting story, is also a dad, is doing a bunch of really cool stuff with a supplement business and a professional basketball trainer. But yeah, man, it's just, you have to listen. But I think it's so interesting how people's life kind of takes this journey and it ends up like right where they need to be in many respects. But the way that you get there is like just absolutely insane. You just have to listen to it. I won't do it justice if I try and like tease it out or explain it at all.
Yeah, changing schools pretty much every year, getting injuries in basketball, playing basketball in China and kind of where he's doing right now. And at the end, I thought the feedback that he had on the, what do you call it?
Paying the college basketball players.
Dude, the way he summarized that, we're going to have to make a social clip for that because that was awesome. But if you're listening to the show, we really appreciate it. We talk about this on every single show, but I really mean it. Like, we have a lot of gratitude for everyone who checks out our podcast. We love getting messages from you. We love seeing the reviews come through. And so a simple ask, if you get value from this podcast, rate it, review it, and share it with a friend. It really does a lot for the show. And it also just fires me the hell up. Like when I see new reviews come through, especially on Apple, because I can see them, I'm like, yeah, let's go. And so without any further ado, let's dive into a great episode with Zeph and Gabe Giannis. Let's go. So Zeph, I should start off by saying welcome to the show. And I want to acknowledge the fact that I am a fair weather fan of sports. I'm not that guy who just gets like captivated by, a team for an entire season. It's just if a team, especially in the Bay Area, is doing well, I jump on the bandwagon. So I thought I'd start there by apologizing for not being dedicated to a specific team for any duration of time.
Oh, no, I'm much on that board only because I'm Canadian. So it's like you can be a Raptors fan as much as you want, but it's like a bizarre, desolate wasteland for prolonged stretches of time. So I kind of hop on where I need to as well. So I feel that 100%.
Yeah, that's what it's like being a Mets fan. So, I mean, we've talked about this on the podcast before, but just to let you know, my kind of sports fandomness, I'm like a diehard Mets fan. Like it actually like it contributes negatively to my life, I would say. It like impacts my sleep and my stress levels. It's like not good, not healthy. And I completely get it being tough stretches. But when it comes to basketball, and just one of the many reasons I was excited to talk to you because we're in the playoffs. I'm like a very fair weather fan for the other sports like Jay, but all New York teams, because that's originally where I'm from. And, the Knicks have had a rough run for a long time. Mm-hmm. And so this is like a really exciting time now, to see them do well. And also like, if you're a New York sports fan, like you hate Philly fans. Like Philadelphia fans for all sports are just like,
insufferable. God. Yeah.
Oh man. So to like first round 76ers Knicks has been really fun to watch. The last game broke my heart, but man, it's been fun. I enjoy getting into the playoffs because a New York team is doing well, but when it comes to anything outside of baseball, like I'm not following during the season.
I got you.
Yeah. Are you a big OKC fan now?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of have to be. I'm surrounded by. I'm just a basketball fanatic. I'm such a junkie that I think what's enamored me the most about OKC is just how bizarrely unique they're kind of tying very two like modern era styles with like bizarre old school tendencies. So it's interesting as like a junkie that does a lot of like synergetic numbers and analytics stuff to see what they're doing because it's. To the modern analyst, it doesn't make sense a little bit on half of it, and to the old era analyst, so they find this weird niche in the middle. But in that instance, I would say yes. But believe it or not, in terms of a coast guy, I kind of grew up a Sacramento Kings fan for a long time.
Okay.
So like way back, like Jason Williams, Chris Webber, White Chocolate was kind of like my era of motivation and inspiration. So that I've kind of held on to that a little bit. But outside of that, now I just I just am a junkie in the sense of watching all and everyone. So
it's cool to hear someone talk about, a sport with that much passion that isn't like, so we have a lot of CrossFit Games athletes on, not a lot, but we've had like a good amount. And Jason obviously, won the CrossFit Games. He's very, very immersed in that world. So he actually did the ESPN broadcast of the CrossFit Games last year. Very so Jason over here was on ESPN.
Pretty cool. Big time. I love that. Yeah.
Oh man, dude, it was so funny. He came back in the first podcast he recorded after being on ESPN. He had this like completely different like voice and like he got all TV on us.
Yeah, his posture got different.
Dude,
Love that.
So funny.
Love that.
But tell us a little bit about your background and with basketball specifically, and kind of how that's evolved to where you're at now. Not really playing as obviously you still play, but coaching.
Yeah. So I'll try my best to shrink it. The timeline is very bizarre. My story is very non-practical, to say the least. But growing up in Canada, so born and raised in Canada, obviously basketball is now very high-end Canadian. Like until probably Steve Nash, the Canadian scene and basketball in general was very dead. So like obviously grew up a hockey guy. My dad was actually a boxer, so grew up big into like I was a big judo guy, kind of combat sports for a while, did a little bit of fighting. Basketball didn't enter my life until probably 7th, 8th grade. I was playing everything, lots of hockey, lots of soccer, doing a lot of like judo stuff. And then this is kind of like the story of my whole basketball trajectory. But one day I was just hanging out in the gym in 8th grade, and this guy named Coach Mather at my school just saw me shooting the ball, and it was technically in formality, my jumper was a mess, but it just found a way to go in. I had no coaching, no understanding. Neither of my parents were like court sport, team sport people. So I just made a lot of shots, and the coach was like, "Hey, you should pop on to our basketball team, come to childhood." I was like, "Yeah, why not?" And I'm just playing everything. And so at that point I was like, "Oh, this is fun." So I kind of continued through that process of playing sports. But what's funny is I still didn't know anything about it. So I went to this massive high school called LCI. I think grades 9 through 12, we had close to 4,000 students.
That's huge.
It was big for a little city like Lethbridge. It was massive. We had like 3 major high schools. And so, anyway, went there, believe it or not, it's actually where Brent Fikowski went to school, played volleyball there. So, fun CrossFit side. I had no idea. I didn't know anything about CrossFit. I grew up like right near Fikowski in my life and had no idea. So, but went there, did not make the varsity team, barely made the freshman team. And I was just like, I liked it, but I wasn't as good as I thought at it once I kind of got put into that setting. Progressively transferred to another high school called Winston Churchill, a little bit smaller. A bunch of my friends went there, and same thing. I'd gotten better at that stage, a little bit of JV, a little bit of varsity. But that summer, for whatever reason, I had this like bizarre inkling to just get really good at basketball. So I kind of shut my mind off to most of these other sports. That's when I started to kind of specify in that regard. I actually ended up working up as a housekeeper at a hotel to pay a guy to train me at this university. Started to kind of get into that niche. And then I went to this huge camp in the Midwest of Canada called Clipper Camp, linked to a college called Briarcrest. And one of the coaches saw me there and was like, "Hey, I really like you."
And how old were you then when you like decided to go all in? Because one of the things that we've talked about with other guests and Jay a lot is like, what the appropriate age is to start like really specializing, and how much of that is happening like younger and younger with kids. Yeah. And like, what's the benefit? Like, is that really what's necessary to go all in? So how old were you when you were like basketball? That's it.
I was really young growing up through grade school. So I actually skipped like 2nd grade-ish, and I was already young to start. So I would have been around 14 as a sophomore. So 14, 15, right in that age.
That's pretty young. Most people are freshmen at 14. Yeah.
So my senior year of high school, I was actually 16. I started my senior year at 16. So I went to this Clipper camp, and the coaches liked me. They said, "Hey, come on, let's do this." It was a boarding prep school, kind of in the middle of nowhere. And that was what completely changed my life. I was fortunate enough to be very submerged in a culture where it was tied to a college. So the giant dorm setting where all the high school students and the college students lived in the same dorms, took part in the same festivities. We shared the same facilities as college guys. So I was pretty much thrown into deep water right away. And it was a lot of fun. And that's kind of where I found my love. From that point on in my life, the injury bug, man, I separated my shoulder and kind of ruptured my MCL a little bit and was kind of dinged up. And through that process, started losing offers and teams because I was a skinny little kid. I was maybe 6 feet tall, $160, soaking wet. Like I was a little guy. So yeah, I was playing against the odds as it was. And so Easter weekend, believe it or not, rolled around way late in the year, and at a university reached out to me called Colorado Christian University. It's a Division II school in Lakewood, Colorado, right off of Denver. The first week of being asked to play varsity, I slept through an alarm. So showed up like 20 minutes late to a practice, just like a little guy freshman on his first week on the job. Terrible idea. And then the next day, power went out in the apartment, and I had like the old school analog clock. I wasn't using my phone as an alarm. And so obviously reset it, missed it again. And so the coaches were very upset with me and booted me back down. And I kind of took all of my attention elsewhere and dove into this relationship and told basketball, you know what, if this isn't for me, it isn't for me. If I'm going to keep getting hurt and missing stuff and people are going to treat me this way, I'm out of there. And I actually took a gap year, went way up to Canada, worked on the Arctic oil rigs, believe it or not, on a coring rig to make all this money, to get married to this specific somebody. And then throughout that, I came back to Colorado Christian, and me and this lady had broken up. And I was like, I put all my eggs in the identity basket of this particular thing and realized, man, like I want to try and play basketball again. So I started working out, tried out for the team, and made the team again. And this time on the varsity group, and we were kind of getting ready to do all that. And I got a phone call from USCIS, the immigration company, because I was on a student visa. But the family of the girl I was with had co-signed on a lot of my paperwork to be in the United States. And so unfortunately, in a very quick matter of days, they're like, no, like if you don't get this paperwork signed, you're out of here. Like you're deported because you're not eligible to be here under the status you're under. And so I was just frantically phoning everyone, but understandably, like you're not going to attach yourself to student loans and things of this measure if you don't know somebody that way. And so I essentially got deported. And like,
where's your relationship with your family through all this? So sorry to interrupt, but like, how are they like, what's their, are they like super supportive of like, you taking all these turns? Like kind of what does that look like? Because one of the things that stood out from the story too, that I'm super curious about is how young you were like, hey, I'm going to go on this adventure. I think that's something that's also counter to like how I grew up and counter to, I feel like what a lot of, kids are, you're still going back every year in college and stuff. So where kind of they in this whole situation?
Yeah, man, my mother and father are one extremely trusting. They did a phenomenal job of raising me and I guess, and necessarily just trusting my intuition as I had gotten older. My family, and because of my father's background, my mother, we moved around a lot. Like before I was even 14 years old, we had moved, I think 17 or 18 times. So this idea of
because of jobs?
Yeah, it was a lot of chasing work. My dad was in the oil field and an electrician. And so we were all kind of just bouncing around. So like I was, believe it or not, in a different school for every single grade of my life, except for twice. So like kindergarten through 8th, and then 9th, I was in a different school for every grade. And that led.
Pulling on that thread for just a quick second, how does that work? Meaning, I see with my kids, because you have 2 daughters, right?
I do.
How old are they?
One is around 19 months, and the other is 3 weeks old. Very fresh. So.
Oh, wow.
Brand new. Yeah, brand new.
Gabe's about to be in your same camp here in just a minute.
Man, I didn't know it was that soon. It's 2 weeks, you said?
Yeah, 3. Yeah.
3. Wow. Congrats.
3 today, actually. Yeah. Today's 3 weekday. So, yeah.
So I'm curious, my kids are older, right? I have a 13 and a 10-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
And so, our kids have switched schools. Like my daughter switched schools once. My son has not really switched schools. And you create friendships and bonds and connections there. And then you kind of feel comfort and you move on. I'm curious, as the new kid every year, like, what kind of lessons did that teach you? Because I feel like that's tough, man. I mean, because just when you start developing a relationship, it's gone again, and then it's gone again. So how does that work? I mean, did you just kind of like, just from the get-go, did you always keep this wall up where you're like, hey man, I'm not really going to make good friends here because I'm going to be leaving in a year anyways? I mean, is that kind of the way it went?
Yeah.
And I'll just add to that, like not only as the new kid, but you were also always younger than most of your peers, correct?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All of the above. And I think it kind of came in twofold. I think, as you said, one of the largest problems, quote unquote, I had as I kept moving around is I did not struggle to connect with people in terms of conversationally. Where I struggled was to allow people, like you talk about like vulnerable friendships, you're around with friends and men long enough to be willing to express yourself further than, just the old, hey, how are you? And I think that was extremely difficult for me, knowing that as a kid, like you develop these relationships where all of a sudden you feel more emotionally tied to your friend groups and all the upbringing and the families, and then being pulled from that, it just stings a little bit more and a little bit more. So I got really good at fitting into every room, but not emotionally connecting with everyone in the room. And I think that stuck with me for a very long time. And I think not until recently, I mean, this is the longest I've been in Oklahoma City now for, I guess we're coming up on 6 years. And this has been the longest I've ever been anywhere in my entire life. So I think being a young kid, I got really, really good at walking into a room and being able to figure out, like I became very emotionally and socially intelligent, but also very, very walled up in the essence of I was very, I'm looking for the intentional on the information I shared, knowing that the more I let people into what it is I'm going on and with and through, hurt more to walk from the people that actually understood why I was, if for whatever reason, sour on one day or, but yeah, it was difficult because it came with, I was really good at making friends, but really bad at making best friends, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So you can't, you almost couldn't, because like you could just, get along with a bunch of guys and it's all good. But then like that level of connection that's a little bit deeper than that, it's almost like you almost, first off, that takes time. And then secondly, like I imagine that Band-Aid rips harder if the more connection you have. So every year you went to a different school all throughout middle school.
So kindergarten and first grade. Kindergarten, I was actually, believe it or not, in French immersion. So I was only speaking French, no English. And then first grade, my mother taught me homeschool, just because we had been moving around so much. So my sister and I were homeschooled. From that point on, from essentially, third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade, sixth grade, seventh grade, all different. Seventh and eighth, I was at one school for half the year. And then ninth grade and 10th grade, two different schools. And then my junior and senior year, when I was at the prep, that was the only time I really like hunkered down for 2 full years in one spot. So.
And you being a dad now and having these two girls, is that played into you being in OKC for as long as you've been? Like, is that something that because of your upbringing, you're like, hey, I want to make sure that there's some stability for my girls? Or do you think that there is a way to do it where you guys are moving and you're possibly following? Because I know you have, two businesses now, following wherever the opportunity is. Is that ever going to play into like you making the next move? Or from your experience, do you think that you got some good out of, being able to just kind of adapt to where you're going?
Yeah, it absolutely has played. And shout out to my wife, Paige, too. She's and this is funny about this is kind of the funny joke if you ever come to Oklahoma, where a lot of people in Oklahoma are not from here, but they're stuck here. That's like the funny like context of like we all meet from somebody from here and get pulled here and we stay.
We're coming at some point.
Yeah, you better get out here. That's what I'm saying. So, but that's how I feel. I've never felt like my roots are shallow but wide. This is the first time I feel like there's depth to the tree that I'm growing. For me, originally, I've been everywhere. As that story kind of projects further into my basketball career, I had no issues with just like get on a bus and go. Like the summer prior to my senior year, I didn't even go home. As much as I loved my family, I was so driven by the fact of just I needed to get as good as possible. All I did was saved up enough money to live on a Greyhound bus in a duffel bag, and I would just go from basketball camp to basketball. I never went home. I just camp, back to school, camp. So I never had that problem until recently, when I realized now the first question that pops up into my mind as a father and a husband is, as soon as an opportunity arises, it's never like, okay, well, how does that impact my business, or how does that impact me? It's like, okay, is my family going to love this with me? And that decision process has completely changed. Where now when I get these job offers and I think about going to DeKalb, it's like, no, I don't want it. And it's nothing to do with it. So the job was amazing. It was just the fact that I don't want to do that anymore.
It's so funny how your priorities shift, right? Like
crazy.
Completely shift.
Well, and the older the kids get, the more rooted you become, because like for right now, your kids are young and so are Gabe's. And so like if you move, like, yeah, your family might not be around or whatnot, but as soon as your kids start making friends, man, it is hard. Like,
hard, yeah.
I don't envy the situation. Like, for example, your dad. And I think that everybody makes the best decision they can at the time. And it's like, I think about that a lot as a dad. Like, you could look back and say, well, we moved a bunch, like that sucked. But it's like, you know, maybe that was just what he needed to do to provide for the family. And like, that's a tough situation to be in, because like your work is constantly moving, and that's just part of the job. Like, I have a friend of mine that comes to our men's clubs, and he's in the military, and he just knows he's going to be at different places for like 2-3 years. And he has 5 boys. And so he knows that he's just going to be moving, and it's just part of the gig. But like, I think if you have the opportunity to not do that, I think that's a huge blessing, because then the kids can make more friends in the area.
Yeah. And I would say that like 2-3 years is almost like a little tougher than every year. I just feel like it's like just enough time to like really build some like friends, some relationships, and then like boom, you're moving. But Zeph, I didn't want to cut your story short, but I really to, you know, the part like, how did you end up going pro and playing in China?
Yeah. So yeah, and that's where
tell us about China.
It's as insane as you would think. And so, and I don't like to say, like, I got paid to play basketball, but I don't, now that I've been in that world long enough to know guys that have grinded out a career. Like, I mean, I was in China for 4.5 months, you know, and then, which is even how I got stuck back here is even crazier. So like, yes, but I almost like to consider like the journey itself. I don't like to put the tag as a professional basketball player only for sense. Now within that story, I had the opportunity to do so, but after Briarcrest, so this is kind of all fast forwards very quickly, is I got to Briarcrest after getting kicked out for all the visa stuff. And it was like day 3. We were just doing preseason games and all that jazz. And they had re-waxed the floors, and there was water on the floor. And I was like just cutting, foot hits the water, hits the wax, snap, fractured ankle, 3rd-degree ankle sprain. It's like perfect timing, you know? And then first day back from practice, we're like a transition setting. I'm in a sprint and my foot is behind me, and somebody accidentally stepped on my heel, same ankle, rolls it over. And so it had been late in that year, and all of the doctors had ankle injuries up to this point. That's what sparked this whole collagen thing behind me. But the doctors were like, man, like, you need reconstruction surgery to do anything functionally again in your life. Like, there's no way you should be running, jumping, cutting. My talar's tilt was so bad, you could pull my whole foot out of my socket and yank, because the connective tissue is so loose. And I was too stubborn. So I was like, no, we essentially taped it up, soft casted it, braced it. So I had, believe it or not, I wore a shoe a size bigger on my left foot than my right foot to fit all of the junk ahead of my feet. And so I learned so much about myself, but at the expense of a lot of other things. And now where the craziness of China comes in is my roommate, shout out to Trevor Mabalon, who's one of the best friends I could have asked for throughout this bizarre stage of my life. And he was connected to a company called OC International that it's a missions company where they drop athletes to play in these professional leagues throughout the world. I was like, man, okay, well, I'll try and go to China. I didn't know like the visa processes to get into China was as egregious as I didn't know they were. So anyway, in my naivety, I tried to go through the process, and I had like $898 in my bank account, and there was only one ticket to go to China for less than that in an entire calendar year. And it was like 3 weeks from the day I decided to go to China. And in my mind, I'm like, it can't be too bad to get a visa if it's just going to be a playing working visa in China in that amount of time.
Oh yeah. Not like
no
that.
shot. No shot. And so I bought the ticket, not knowing that. And so 2 days before the flight was supposed to take off, I got a phone call saying, hey, your paperwork's back. You got cleared, which is like, doesn't even make sense. It normally doesn't even get to the consulate in that amount of time. Everything happened so quickly. I landed in China and I realized like my phone doesn't work. I don't speak Chinese. Nobody wants to speak English. And I don't have an address. I don't
You're
have
in Beijing?
I landed in Beijing and then I transferred. Shenzhen is where I was living.
Oh, you went to Shenzhen?
Yeah, that's where I was living.
Jason's been there.
I know all about Shenzhen.
Well, yeah,
you're right on the border of Hong Kong over there.
Bingo.
Yeah.
And that's where a lot of guys play wild ball there, is because your visas are 90 days. So they'll just hop on the train to Hong Kong, boop, boop, hop back, and you flips the visa back because it's not a part of the mainland. So you don't have to leave. You just Hong Kong and back, boop, boop, you reflip the visa. And so anyway, got to Shenzhen. I got out of the airport and I'm like, I don't know where I'm going. Like, I kind of had like a micro panic attack. I was like, I have nothing. I have a visa showing that I'm working for this guy. I don't even know if the address on paperwork is his address that I'm supposed to be living. Like, So I'm just standing outside and like 800 guys start yelling at me in Chinese, trying to get me to take a cab. I'm like, guys, I don't know where I'm going. I can't help you. And believe it or not, by the grace of God, this car pulls up with like a picture of me. So Joel must have sent somebody and he's like, this is you. I'm like, I guess. So I put my stuff in the trunk, and for all I know, I could have been abducted. But yeah, but that journey, and man, that 4.5 months completely changed my life, because one, I had never done basketball full time. Like, you're talking 3 workouts a day, hour and a half, weights, shooting, blah, 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 film, outside, inside, like all the works. And over the course of my time there, I fell so in love with that process. And in the meantime, realized the Eastern medicine side of things, where everybody's telling you to get surgery, the whole context of like the power of proprioception and muscular structure and how to manipulate the muscles in my feet to take pressure off of specific points in the connective tissue and all this jazz. They're like, no, you don't need surgery. We just need to fix your feet, essentially.
So you never ended up getting surgery?
Never, not one time. Never.
So when you were with the Eastern medicine in Shenzhen, so did you end up like going the herbal route? I mean, because Chinese herbs did you end up going down that path? Well, because I mean, I'm sitting here looking at behind you is like, I don't know, 1,000 boxes of collagen. So obviously you're a fan of collagen, and so we could talk about collagen, for sure. But in addition, so my entire family and a lot of our friends go to a Chinese medical doctor here who bridges a gap between Eastern and Western medicine. This guy, very cool. My son calls him the witch doctor, but whatever. He just but this guy, he'll do acupuncture, he'll do a bunch of stuff, but his main thing, so he does a lot of stuff, but his main thing is like the Chinese herbs, which have, been around for thousands of years. And I'm curious, how involved did you get on that side of the Eastern medicine? Because you can go down a rabbit hole there, I'm sure.
No, outside of like, I drank a lot of bizarre, unique teas, but I didn't get into as far as like the liquid, like the liquid recovery, the liquid healing stuff. And like, that was portion, like when I would go to these sessions, we did a lot of like massage therapy type stuff and all that jazz. And it was more, I started studying the practicality of just movement versus surgery and how to manipulate movement. I had some people there that I'd gotten in touch with through a company called ZQP. And they were teaching me, like, proprioception is kind of the big word, but Dwayne Wade was kind of like one of the first pioneers in that regard of like, he had meniscus problems, and instead of repairing or replacing, he literally removed them and just restructured the muscles around his knees to take all of the tib to femur pressure. Like, it's a bizarre medical research that you can kind of check out. But in that, they play a lot into that in that instance, where it's more about how you structure the muscles to take pressure off of specific locations. It's very physiological in the sense of, because of the lengths of your femurs or X, Y, and Z, there's obviously muscular impingements that come with such things. Or obviously, like, I had absolutely destroyed my ankles on so many levels. And that came with like really soft, loose connective tissue, a lot of unnecessary scar tissue. But instead of going in there and removing it, they essentially taught me, no, that there's muscles that can develop in your feet to alleviate the tension that will be put on such places. And so that was kind of my big element in that regard. So, but falling in love with that process enabled me to play basketball for 4.5 months, injury, pain-free, coming out of a year where I couldn't even functionally like walk without pain medications. So that was wild.
That's wild. So when I hear proprioception, like I've heard that term thrown around in like the CrossFit, like weightlifting space for like you touch a muscle and it helps you activate it. Like that's always been how I understood it. It's like, if you want someone to like use their lats versus their traps, you can go behind them while they're doing something. And just literally like, hey, activate this. And it's like it's weird, right? Like it's like feeling it makes you kind of want to like activate it. So how is that used for you and your feet and your ankle? Like what I'm curious what kind of stuff you were doing that helped. Because it is pretty crazy to go from where you were to playing basketball.
A miracle. Yeah. And so, and again, I'm speaking with a level of like a lack of like formal education in this process too. So there's probably a lot of people that could correct my terminology or understanding of this too, but
we're not doctors. Is that what?
So we're all just out here. But anyway, the analogy that I was kind of given was, imagine trying to type on a keyboard with welding gloves on. and feeling where the keys are. So you have an understanding of where the letters are, but lacking the palpable understanding of where you are on the actual keyboard itself. The same rules apply with your feet on the floor. So like, obviously, like there's the whole grounding theory out there of, like putting your feet in the grass, feeling, but for me, it was, the power of barefoot work and then strengthening my neuromuscular connection to actually putting my feet on the ground and then strengthening how they react to movement with those nerves actually feeling where my body is. That's like the big fear of athletic training as a whole, is like you think about the amount of foam or Air Max Zoom or platform you have between the nervous system and the ground leaves so much room for guessing in terms of the muscle structures in the bottom of your feet. So if you can train your muscles to then understand where they are, whether or not that form is present, enables you to then react to specific angles or decelerations in a way that takes the pressure off your body. Because a lot of those injuries happen in the minuscule of your body, not being aware of how to fire a specific muscle to take that pressure off the tissue, right? Because it can't feel that space. Now, there's obviously freak injuries where obviously X amount of force is going to take over X amount of muscular structure. But in the same breath, a lot of it is just your mind's inability to feel and know where it is to react to that specific space and time.
So did you do a lot of barefoot type training? Because
Tons.
I mean, there is tons of studies at this point that a lot of like knee issues, ankle, even higher up into the hips, a lot of that stuff is centered around the foot. And I have the flattest, fattest foot ever.
I love that.
And so it's something that I think about regularly because I do a lot of training barefoot. I do a lot of jiu-jitsu but I'm curious, what role did there's been a whole like theory of this, right? Because back in the day, it was like, if you look at like minimalist runners, then it kind of got into like these kind of like bigger soles.
Oh yeah.
Now there's, I'd say like more awareness to like the Vibrams, but how does that play a role?
But I mean, I don't know if this is different in basketball. I feel like in the running community, like at least what's in now, the pendulum is swung the other way. Like Hokas are huge. They're a huge brand, and they
look like big rocking chairs, man.
Like they're huge. Because there was a while, because I was actually like very deep in like the triathlon space, and I worked at a running shoe shop when Vibrams were like the thing, and everyone came in asking for either like barefoot shoes or zero drop or stuff like that. Has that, just building off of Jason's question, like, has that changed in basketball too a little bit?
Yes and no. So where I, and this is kind of where the collagen thing gets sparked. My, I guess, quarry with this space is typically the reaction to discomfort is protection rather than adaptation. So like when you get into the running space, for example, now the beauty about running is you're just running. You're in a straight line at a pace, that there's very little room for unforeseen things, so in the running space at that point, you just want to maximize the efficiency of your gait. You want to maximize the efficiency of your heel to toe, all the things that's going to enable you to, I guess, alleviate the opportunity for muscles to fire at an inopportune time or stay under tension for an inopportune time. When you get these big soles, they're essentially putting pressure in places to allow that cycle to happen most naturally. But when you get into like basketball spaces where it's a contact sport, in the air, on the ground, with the ball, without the ball, guys seen, guys unseen, you get put in positions where these unforeseen circumstances force your body to react to unforeseen reactions, right? So that's kind of where I get differentiate, but where I get problems with people is, and this is where you kind of get to like the space of like feet to knees to hips, is the kinetic chain is very bizarre in the fact that like, okay, if you overbrace an ankle, for example, ankles were meant to be a mobile joint, right? So like your foot sitting underneath an ankle joint, your foot was made to be able to surface with whatever is beneath it, versus your knees were meant to be a stable joint. So your knees, you have LCL, MCL, ACL, everything is packed in there, right? For the sake of, you don't want mobility, you want rigidity in there. And so as people overbrace or oversole or all these things, what happens is you're forcing joints or muscle tissues to be something they're not. So whether you're putting like a massive sole under your foot, or even when you're overbracing in the context of an ankle, you're forcing what's supposed to be a mobile joint to be stable, which means if you're going to remove the mobility of your ankle, you're forcing the mobility to then move up into your knees, right? Which is where then if your knee is like, no, you have really great knee structure, really great quad activation, all this jazz, your knees want to stay rigid. Okay, then your hips are what's going to have to be mobile, which creates this bizarre, as Jason was kind of saying, from the foot, like the foot up exercise of it just kind of works its way up the chain per se to the next joint up. So But for me, yes, in the basketball space with shoes in general, obviously you need shoes that that have traction and that bite and enable you to move. But in the same breath, what I tell people all the time is, but when you're in controlled environments where there are things happening that are coming with like a neuro expectation. So like I know in a workout, I'm going to approach a specific location, drop into a cut to receive the ball. Like my mind and my muscles are all in agreement here on what I'm doing. Minimize this fearful adaptation of protection in that space. Now, if you're playing live, and then that's when you start getting into the minutia of what it looks like. But I think, yeah, for hands down, especially in the basketball community, you're seeing a lot of basketball. Like that's why the Kobe's are getting more and more popular again, barring everything happen. Like I'm a big Converse guy. Like the floor feel is what they call it. For me is vital. Like the less space between my foot and the ground that I can have enables me to feel, actually, believe it or not, a lot of people are like, well, what about the ankle lock and ankle support? I've said, that's just because you haven't understood what it takes to develop the structures to rely on a shoe like this. Because I'm not relying on a shoe for support per se in my ankles. I'm relying on my body. I'm relying on the shoes to bite the ground so I can move somewhere. You know what I mean?
So interesting how this plays into a lot of things, like in our space, CrossFit, weightlifting stuff, and like people like overusing weight belts. I know Jason loves his weight belt. Like, how much of that is okay? How much of that isn't? You see so many people out there that also aren't like necessarily maybe strong enough to need all these tools, but they're in like, like knee brace, like not knee braces, knee wraps, like weight belt, ankle wraps and all these things. And like how much of that is stunting the like natural development of those joints versus like, you just using the thing. I'm curious how big my wife is so big on our youngest, like being barefoot as much of the time for that reason. Obviously that's a big thing for your kids as well, I'm assuming, for the girls.
Yeah. And even like Maeve, our little one, she obviously, unless she's just going to track mud all over that, she is infatuated with just getting dirty for whatever reason. So she just loves like dirt. So we'll throw something on her. Yeah. But even the shoes we buy her, like there's these little baby shoes called Stride 360 or something, I think. And they just, even like, they're not like the way their feet are, everything about their body is growing so fast. And you don't want to box their toes or their feet into a position where they're, it's because they're so little, they're going to be falling down and stuff anyway. So that naturally like, but you want to enable that freedom, that dexterity in the feet. And yeah, whether they're barefoot or anything else. And so what I tell my wife all the time, like they're going to be barefoot a lot and they're going to play a lot of tag. Those are like my two, because any of those things where there's no barrier between your feet and the ground, but you're also having to react in real time to situations that it's not necessarily your decision first, enables those connections to be made very early. So I tell kids, just go outside and play tag. That is like the best form of like foot to mind proprioception. Like go play barefoot tag in the grass somewhere.
All right, guys, we're taking a break from the podcast to talk to you about the most exciting thing that we've launched at Train Hard in a while. And that is the Train, Protect, Provide collection that is now live on the Train Hard shop. If you've been listening to the podcast or reading our emails, you've heard us talk about these three words: train, protect, provide. These are the three pillars that are at the foundation of everything we're trying to do here at Train Hard. Train, pretty self-explanatory. We train hard to be prepared for anything life is going to throw our way. Protect, it's not about going out there and looking for trouble. It's just about being ready in the case that trouble finds us. And then provide, which is probably the most meaningful one for me, isn't just about putting food on the table. It's not just about providing financially, but it's about being there and being present and being this force of stability for your family at all times and providing anything that they need at any time. And that's something that I aspire to do every single day as a dad and a husband. And I know it's something that's super important to Jay as well. So we're super excited to now have Train, Protect, Provide on some awesome apparel. The team took so much time to pick out some t-shirts, some crew necks, and some hoodies that are a little different than what we've done in the past, but are different in a really good way in that they are so comfortable and super versatile that you can work out in them or you can wear them out and they are going to look great. So go to the shop right now, the Train Hard shop, check out the Train, Protect, Provide collection. And since you're listening to this on the podcast, use code podcast and that'll get you free shipping. So head over to the shop, check it out, but let's get back to the show.
I'm curious. I heard you talk about there was water on the court and you like hurt your ankle.
Oh man. Yeah.
Right. And then I heard you talk about, your alarm not working. Then the power goes out and the alarm doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious what role faith plays in the journey, because, for example, I know what it's like to get a Chinese visa. It takes time. And you were able to get yours. And then you had these different things happen throughout your life. And so I'm wondering, looking back on these different things and kind of where you're at today, I want to talk about what you're doing today specifically, but I'm curious what role faith plays along that journey, because I could imagine you could get pretty down on yourself, especially being alone, and what kind of rooted you and grounded you to continue to go forward, especially when it comes to faith.
Amen. Yeah, no, faith is not a part of, faith is the journey. I am nothing but, and have been nothing but, a medium to what is this bizarre journey thus far. Like, very much, like, I mean, it's a very cliche statement, but the context of, like, God does not qualify those who are, he doesn't call those who are typically qualified. He qualifies those who are called, like, that's the parameter. And so in the injuries, when the fact that, like, my basketball acumen and my resume outside of, like, a really good years of high school basketball, no part of this journey lines up to what it is I'm doing currently. There's no part of this that I can take credit for, because I'm, one, extremely undeserving, extremely educationally, and everything that a human being needs to see and understand. Okay, these are the check marks of somebody that should be in this position in his life in the basketball world. He needs blank, blank, blank. I check none of those boxes off at all. So when people ask me a part of this journey faithfully all the way from the beginning, there was this prayerful, faithful decision I made between me and God to say, look, like, I have this instinctual spiritual understanding of what it is you've called me to do, whether or not it looks proper or improper. I have a feeling you're going to let me arrive there in some form or fashion. And that's been all the way from injuries. I mean, I've broken my ankles multiple times, even before I had played college basketball, and all of these things that they added up to this very unique journey where it enables me to be so much more humble when people approach, because it's so easy to want to work out or get advice or desire to be taught by someone that has played in the NBA, that has done, and I have done none of those things. I haven't, like, there is no level of like formal, okay, I've done this, so you should respect, but I have no, like, you really have no reason to respect my opinion other than just hearing it be like, wow, that really worked. Like, that's all I got. And so because of God's ability to equip me with this gift of understanding something that I wasn't fortunately able to put out physically, but I think had I chased the journey the way I wished it had panned out for me, I would have never been in a position to be humble enough to accept the fact that this wasn't my doing. Like, I at no point was capable of being put in this position without God has opened and walked me up to these doors. Now, I walked through them, but the doors themselves were open. I just had to make the decision to faithfully continue to step through that path. And whether it be injury or not, I remained focused and understanding, you've given me this, you've given me this understanding. I'm going to continue to make decisions that align with who I know you've created me to be in this process, if that makes sense. Yeah.
And just to clarify for today, right? Your scope, aside from that badass college we're going to talk about, like, I love the humbleness and what you're talking about. And I do think there's something to be said about, there are definitely people that could add value to athletes and others, business and others, who come from different backgrounds and perspectives, and they don't have to be in the NBA, as an example. So what are you currently doing today? Yeah. So fast forward all of that through. I'm currently now a professional basketball trainer full-time. I do nothing else. Working from this year, I'll have about 20 to 26 professional athletes. I'll have about 40 to 45 collegiate athletes. And then in the summers, myself and my interns kind of handle about 50 to 60 high school athletes. And my job, I kind of take a unique niche approach. But what I tell people is I'm not the rep guy. I struggle with being with people that gets paid to be like a glorified rebounder. Or they come in and it's just like reps on reps. Like, there's beauty in that, and like, I mean, Bruce Lee, one of my favorite quotes of all time, where he says, I don't fear men that knows 10,000 kicks, but I fear man that's done one kick 10,000 times. I've appreciated that mantra for a very long time. But what I tell people is, my goal is to teach you how to kick so that you can leave and do it 10,000 times. So I have a very
educational approach to basketball in itself, where it's situational based, it's movement based understanding of how to be put in positions to make very, very high level decisions. And then it's your job to, as we kind of work. And now at the NBA professional level, we do so much work together that it's the reps included in those things because the minutiae are so small. But essentially, I'm just a skill acquisition trainer. So I teach basketball players not only how to, I guess, increase their skills, like certain skills that they may or may not have, but then how such skills apply in the situational understanding. So if I put you in a specific action or a specific read or a specific time on the floor, how and what movements have I taught you can apply to this situation to make decisions that are going to be maximum efficiency all the time, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
man.
Good.
Dude, it's just so interesting to hear someone talk about just being such a student of the game. Like it's fun. And it's like, for me, it's been really fun to see kind of like the more analytical approach to all sports.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm a huge baseball nerd, so I see how that whole sport has shifted. But to hear someone talk about basketball is really cool. And that's why, like in baseball, for example, now, like they literally, I forget which team had it first, but it was the first time that they had someone in the dugout in like a professional coaching role that never played baseball. Like these things are changing because you don't just need people that played the game in the past. Like you need people that are literally these analytical minds that can, you know, like bring a different perspective to it. And I think that, you know, to your point, Jay, of like, you know, you don't necessarily need to play in the NBA to provide value. I think that, you know, that applies to so many things, and that you can get so much value from people that haven't been so immersed in whatever world, the business world, even like the parenting world. Like we talk to a lot of dads about dad stuff, but I think that there's a lot of value you can get from people outside of the experience because they almost have a different take, right? Like they can almost like bring a different perspective, and I think point to some blind spots maybe. And that might not be like the perfect analogy, but I think that that's what's really cool in what you're doing and what you're kind of seeing in sports. And I think that that's how it translates into all aspects of life. And that sometimes, you know, Jason talks about this a lot. You get stuck in these echo chambers of people that have been so immersed in whatever you're talking about that they can't kind of like see the forest from the trees a little bit.
I mean, a really good example is like in baseball for years and years and years. I remember Alex Rollin, who was, he played in the minor leagues, played for Cal Berkeley here. They would always say, hey, there's no weight training overhead, right? So imagine if you went through your entire career, minor leagues, let's just say big league, let's just say MLB, everything you've ever been taught in your life is like, dude, if you're a pitcher, you never lift any load over your head. When you get out, right, that is just your perception is reality. Like you've been basically ingrained in this your entire life to assume that's true.
Yeah.
Whereas someone else who maybe just has a love for the game, maybe played to a certain level, but maybe has been navigating through strength conditioning or navigating here, all of a sudden their perspective is different, and they might bring something to the table that athlete never would be open-minded to because all they know is this lane, you know? So that's an example of like how, I guess, getting different lenses from different people. The kid thing, I don't know. I definitely think that when you don't have kids and you do have kids, it definitely changes the way you think. But that's not to say that if someone doesn't have kids and they've studied children, let's just say you're a teacher. I'll give you, this is a good example. If you're a teacher and you've had thousands of kids come through your school and you have insight to give other parents, I think that's brilliant because you're in that world immersed through a different lens that a parent is and not as deeply connected to it. You know, it's just different. Yeah. So that's an example.
Last thing I definitely want to touch on before we finish is tell me why I need collagen for my joints. Why is it important? How do I bulletproof my ankles and my knees?
Dave's gonna have it ordered before the podcast is over. This
Love
guy.
That. Go hop on. So how this had originally started. Oh, hey, look at us go. So again, my weird niche is that I'm a big movement guy as well as basketball. There's a lot of like the beauty of basketball and why I find it so fascinating is like it's one of the most uniquely deceleratory sports I've ever seen. I don't even know if that's a word, but like going from maximum pace to minimum pace in extreme amounts of time. Like you have to be able to run as fast as you can and stop and change directions, but on hardwood, but in the same breath while also controlling something that's dissociated from your body. So there's a lot of connection going on.
When you put it like that.
Yeah. It's a bizarre way to think about it, because doing it by yourself is different, but when you have something you can't get rid of that you can't turn over while doing that at maximum speed. And so what happens is your body has to be so many places at once. And I had a lot of athletes. It was like one of my first summers kind of really becoming a professional basketball trainer. And I just remember, like, I never really dealt with jumper's knee. Fortunately, patella tendonitis wasn't an issue I necessarily dealt with all the time. But that is like the blaring horn of basketball players in general, is like Osgood, like that patella tendon just gets eaten up all the time. And anyway, I didn't know. Kids keep telling me, like, how do we help? And the classic answer for every single kid for the last 2 decades has been ibuprofen, ice, and rest. Ibuprofen, ice. And it's like, quite literally, when I mean this as emphatically as possible, the opposite of what will do anything to actually heal and then, I guess, synthesize the collagen in those specific areas. So I did a bunch of research, and I found this research study done in UC Davis. There's a guy named Keith Barr. If you don't know who that is, he is like the ultimate brain behind anything collagen specific with force production, injury prevention, maintenance, blah, blah, blah. He did this very cool study, I guess, loading a specific amount of collagen with a specific amount of vitamin C. Taking it, they realized at about the 45-minute to an hour mark, all of those amino acids have then been metabolized. So they're available for synthesizing the joint itself. And so they did this study with a placebo, a 5 grams of they did gelatin at the time, and then a collagen group. And the 5 gram group of just placebo effect took this collagen an hour prior to just doing a loading session. They jump rope for 6 minutes was one study. They've done other like force production studies on just jumping, and they had a 54% collagen synthesis increase in that specific joint that they were loading. They did the 5 grams of gelatin collagen, 59%. Then they did 15 grams, and there's this wild jump to 154% of collagen synthesis in this specific joint. So then they did more studies to realize, okay, well, what is it about this collagen and how is it repairing such location? And they realized it's the loading aspect that is as if not more crucial than the collagen itself. Now, the collagen is 40% of the fight, but that's why when I designed the supplement, I got very frustrated because there's so many collagen supplements out there. And there's even been studies done, okay, collagen versus whey, the amino acid profiles, but the problem is doing a lot of these studies post-workout, right? And so they make the argument it's not a complete protein, all this jazz. But when you take now types 2 and 3 are really important, bovine collagen, chicken collagen, but those types of collagen, 45 minutes to an hour prior to then loading a specific joint, that's the killer. Because if you take this 15 grams of collagen and then load it, what you're doing is vascularly delivering the amino acid profile to synthesize the collagen in that specific joint. So when I made this product, I realized how many people didn't know that. And so I made the product with a QR code on there. It's essentially just an educational tendon session platform. And it's like an interactive supplement. So when you take the collagen, and I tell people all the time, rest is crucial. Like, it's better to do 2 hour or 2 1 hour or 2 45-minute sessions than it is to like just add these copious amounts of training and volume in one specific time, because those rest periods allow for the synthesized collagen to then adapt into the joint itself. So what I did is I made on the supplement the QR code you scan, and it takes you to a tendon session platform, which essentially teaches you how to load the specific joint that it is you're dealing with tendonitis with. So for example, let's say for all my jumpers out there, you take it an hour prior to a lift, instead of taking it like a prior to just hooping or whatever. If you're going to like heavy squat day or like CrossFit World heavy overhead day with those biceps tendon, rotator cuff, all that jazz is taking a lot of stress, you're going to deliver that. But what is more beneficial is to like very specifically vascularize that joint location. And that's what I try to do with this one is you directly dose it in line with the medical research. I added magnesium, potassium, calcium, knowing people are probably going to be doing it prior to lifting some sort, but then knowing you have to take it an hour prior. So the amino acids are then broken down, but then loading the joint in which needs the collagen is the biggest thing. And that's how why I designed this thing. So
did you use cowhide or what's the?
It's just bovine collagen. It was sourced from a company called Dynamic Nutraceuticals, and they use bovine collagen that's rich in both type 2 and type 3 collagen.
Huh. So as long as, so the whole kind of thing, because I've always, any protein, believe that it's much more beneficial post-workout. I'm sure that a lot of people listening think exactly that. But what you're saying is that the magic here is taking it before and then like finding some way to load specifically the joint that's actually giving you issues.
Bingo.
Because that'll bring that collagen to that joint and help it heal.
That's the game changer. The blood is what moves the amino acids that have been metabolized. That's what changes everything. So
that's interesting. So I normally, I like collagen in my coffee with MCT oil.
Sweet, yeah.
Is that how do people normally utilize your collagen?
So I essentially tell them it's not necessarily a pre-workout because there's no stimulant in it. But let's say this is where I challenge people is depending on your time, and obviously as a dad with kids or as a collegiate athlete or as like an avid CrossFitter, that range changes. But whether or not you're dealing with specific tendonitis motion, the goal is to load that specific location with intentionality. So if, let's say, I know I'm going to go do a squat cycle of some sort, cleans, and then into a Metcon or whatever, what I would tell people is if you're going to be doing the squats, just know what that's loading. That's going to be gluteal hip tendon. That's going to be patella tendon. That's going to be all that jazz. But the difference in my product, it was made to be loaded. We designed it with the intention of it being loaded to synthesize collagen in those specific joints. That was the whole purpose behind it.
And people just drink it with water.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Mix it in, throw it in, stir it up.
Yeah.
There you go.
Just curious. Yeah.
Well, I'm definitely in. I'm definitely in. Dude, I'm a sucker for trying anything.
Yeah. Give it a shot.
God. This guy, Gabe spends more money from supplements and stuff that we find out on the podcast than we make.
That's funny. That's me and Andrew. Anything Huberman says, I'm like, I'll give it a try.
Oh, dude, 100%. You got to try it.
You got to try it.
I think that in 30 days with most of these things, you either feel something or you don't. And then that's kind of how I've I've definitely kept some things. Some things I've tried and I've just been like, I don't know. And then it's not worth it. But then I know. Because I feel like so much of this stuff is so specific, person to person, or some stuff you just don't need as much. Because I know that with some supplements, collagen might be one of these too. Like there is a way to get it through food. Like if you're eating a lot of really collagen, gelatin, heavy meats, like we do a lot of stuff in the slow cooker. So I think that there's also something to be said about are you getting this stuff from your diet and then the supplements should overkill? But dude, I'm always down to try something. The last question I had for you is just, it sounds like you're doing a lot with the basketball training. You obviously now have a supplement company, which, is a whole other world. And, you got a lot of product behind you that I'm sure you're trying to move. What's kind of your, what's been your go-to, your why, any piece of advice for balancing all that with now having, two daughters that, it's funny. Our son, I was telling someone the other day, I was talking to them, he's 17 months old and he is full on toddler mode. And full on toddler mode is dude, he's napping right now, maybe 45 minutes a day if we're lucky. And then the rest of the time, dude, and it's the rest of the time is the rest of the time is he's a Tasmanian devil. So it's so much fun and it's pure entertainment, but it's on. And we're gonna have a second, and I know you have too. So how are you balancing all that, man? What's kind of the key takeaway there?
Gosh, I think, and this has come to my business, to my basketball life, to my college and all that jazz. I think the biggest thing is realizing all of the things I do need to be predicated one off of just the character that I've been hoping to live up to, as a man, as a husband, the biblical, the faithful, the humble man that I aspire to be. Anyway, all of the decisions I make are predicated off of what it is I align with that character, what it is I align with my family. And then I let those decisions then relate to the results of what comes with it. So a lot of people, especially basketball space, a lot of young kids at this age, with the college world, a lot of decisions, the things that motivate them are the NIL deals, the opportunity to make money doing something. Even people in the CrossFit space, it's now I'm only going to do competitions where there's a purse involved. I'm only going to do high rocks because I can make they don't do it because they love it. It's because it's who they are. And who I am is a husband to my wife and a father to my children. And the decisions I make, I let the fiscal business results be nothing but a result of who I am and who I've kind of stayed true to be in that regard. So I'm just simply motivated to be as best I can a husband to my wife and as best I can a father to my kids, and the relationships I build in that regard and how that character translates into how I treat people in my business, how I treat people on the court when I play, all of those things are just a result of me trying to align and develop that character as a human being. And I think outside of that, everything is done well thus far. God has continued to bless me in the decisions I made based on just what he's put in front of me. So that's, I think, the biggest key for me.
I gotta ask, which with the NIL, right?
NILs, yeah.
Yeah.
Gosh, it's crazy.
Good thing or bad thing for the sport of for the collegiate sports?
That's such a loaded question. I've had this debate.
Totally loaded question.
Yeah, it's like, man, good in the sense that the NCAA was, I guess, rewarding themselves too kindly for the work that these kids were doing for far too long. But now the kids are being over rewarded for their value and image rather than their desire to play the sport itself. And I think that's where it stings.
That was really good.
Yeah, but that's what stings, is because now these kids, their image is what gets them paid, not their desire to play basketball. And I think, or football, or whatever these sports are. And I think kids are now more worried about their image to get them paid than what comes with owning the image that they're trying to portray themselves to be, if that makes sense.
Dude, so it was a loaded question, little clickbaity, but you answered it really well. And I actually see similarities between the CrossFit space. You know, one of the things that's unique about the CrossFit space is that at a young age, you could be, 15, 16, 17, especially for girls who they're physically capable and they start doing really well at the CrossFit Games. And all of a sudden it's like they're building a social image. They're doing all these different things because there's money attached to all those things. Yeah. And I think you summarize that really well. Like they're attaching they're not attaching the love of the game, right? They're attaching other stuff. And for longevity, I wonder what the studies will show 5, 10, 20 years from now about this shift. And if it actually leads to more burnout, more whatever, right?
I guarantee it will. Yeah, I'm right on that board.
Oh man, it's so tough, and it's such a good conversation, man. Like we can almost have a whole separate conversation about it. You see stuff like, Coach Prime and his son at Colorado and stuff like that, like the extreme examples of what I imagine a bunch of younger kids now getting into the sports are like, that's what I want to do. That's what I want to be. And they're moving away from like the fundamentals, the love of the game, and all those things, because that's not going to get you paid, right? Like good fundamentals isn't going to get you paid. Being flashy, being a character, all those things is. But I love the way you answer that, man. Really like. Yeah.
And I've been very intentional in that regard of like building a niche, even in this space as a trainer too. I've seen and struggled with, like, I train more people than people know. And that's intentional, because I hide from that context of I don't want this image of I want to train with him because he trained so and so. I don't want my ability to be attached to someone else's skill set per se, when I want my ability to be attached to my understanding of what I can teach you. Like, I want those two things to coincide in health, but in understanding, like, I'm not going to blow up my page or my Instagram feed with all these guys that I've been in the gym with or I'm playing with, because I don't want that to be the reason. And I think that's why I've had such a very, very successful rate of athletes come in and get a lot better, is because they never came in expecting this image of being portrayed like some of these other guys that I've worked out with. Is that they come in, they just want to learn. And so a lot of like the reels I post and stuff for like the high school kids that I train, or I have very few of those. And I think because all these, the desire for a lot of athletes now, as you guys are saying, is like, all I want to be is an image in which represents the value of my contract, rather than the fact that I want to be somebody that can produce in a way that gets paid. I think that's like the biggest loss of connection there. So,
dude, and I think it's wise that you take that approach. We've seen this again, just to kind of take it back to something I know really well, which is camps that get behind a specific athlete. And all of a sudden, you start building a brand around name the athlete in CrossFit, but then that athlete, maybe doesn't have a great season, or maybe that athlete wants to leave and go somewhere else. And I think you're wise to kind of be looking at it through the lens that you are. I think you can highlight those people, of course, but not make your self-worth or your business credibility based on, a person's performance. I think that's, yeah, man. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I feel like I could talk to you for a few more hours.
I feel like we have so much more to chat about. Yeah.
Specifically about China.
We didn't even get that's. I have like two. I'll tell. I don't know how much time you guys have, but I have like two very fast. I think Jason would appreciate the moment if you guys have time to chop up one more.
Tell us the moment.
So this is how I ended up actually landing in OKC, because people always ask me, like, where did that story just end? Because the goal was to go to China to get healthy and good enough to then play in Spain. That was the whole purpose. I'm obviously not in Spain. and I never went to Spain. So I was in China, and I did get healthy. I did get a lot better at basketball. I started to think and play like a professional. My athleticism returned, and I got so, I guess, for the lack of a better word, infatuated with just like this process of like becoming the best basketball player that I can be, that I wanted to branch out. So I was tied to a company when I had gotten out there, and I was like, no, I want to become my own thing. I want to become my own company, my own trainer. And so I linked up with this company out there called ZQP. That's him. They've been helping me. And we put this big contract in place for me to, essentially become a player for their company. So the wild ball circuit in China, if you don't know anything about it, is, as stated, it's absurd. So you do these like short-term contract, not even necessarily contract deals, but there's these guys called bosses. So they'll hit you up, and that's like the direct translation from the Chinese word to English. They're literally called bosses. And the boss hits you up and it's like, hey, we're going to go play on a tour. And they'll call their team blank, World Vision, Team USA. And you just go around and play CBA teams, other random boss man teams. I've had guys play against like the New Zealand Olympic. Like, it's just random basketball events, and you get paid in cash per game. And then like you can have like production stipulations. So like, okay, your base rate's this much catch for this game. If you score this or do that or blah, 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 you get more money. But like they literally, the game's over, they walk up to you with a rubber band of cash. Boop, good game. You hop on the bus, go to the next game. Like that is your contractual professional career in the wild ball circuit in China. And if they don't like you, they'll just ask you to take your shoes off and leave, and you go home. And that's like, there's no obligation there. And people make careers out of it, just building a name. And then bosses, obviously, as you get better and play better, the more bosses are trying to, put you on their tours, because then more people want to. It's a bizarre basketball career culture out there. But I wanted to get into it because it was so much fun. I was making more money there than I could have in Europe. And so got with ZQP, signed this contract so that my visa was up. So most guys, as I had said, in Shenzhen, they just take the train to Hong Kong, hop back to Shenzhen. I called the people in Spain and said, look, I'm really sorry. I'm going to go this route with my basketball career. Unfortunately, like in the faith-based side of things, there was something very powerful about being in a country like China, where I know Christianity is a very like hush-hush no-no out there. So that also enabled me to do a lot of very interesting relational work in that regard. So I was like, you know what, I like this here. But my wife and I have been in conversation, getting to know each other, and I fell in love with her. So I was like, I'm going to take my little break prior to my contract starting. I'm going to fly to Oklahoma City and see my wife for a few weeks, and then hop back over and do my thing. At the time, we were boyfriend and girlfriend, and so I had flown here, and prayerfully, spiritually, faithfully, actually in church, believe it or not, I started having these very bizarre visions of like, do not go back to China. Don't go back. Don't get on a plane. I had dreams of like everything in China was black and white. All the food was rotted. It was bizarre. And I was like, just perfect. Like, God, dude, I just signed this contract. Like, we can figure this out. Like, I want to do that. And like, there was just something so formidably faithful about knowing that I could not go back. And I was very frustrated spiritually and emotionally, but I decided not to go. I called the company. They were absurdly upset, obviously, because they had aligned a bunch of things for me to go play on these tours with this company. And I called them and said, guys, like, I can't go. And they obviously don't understand. As soon as I bring in the word faith, they're like, you're a ridiculous American guy. Like, get off the bus, And so, but believe it or not, obviously, like the whole marijuana thing, there's a lot of guys that use it for helping with sleep and helping with injury prevention and all that jazz. And I had no guys that I had played with and lived with that did that. But I was terrified because I know in China, like any sort of drug at all is like capital punishment. And I wasn't aware because I was here. But while I was here, they actually went into our apartment, took my roommate, took all of his stuff, took all of my stuff, and put him in jail for possession of marijuana and all this stuff. And had I gone back, I would have actually been there the day that they kicked the door in and took us and our stuff. And so I, again, by the grace of God, so I was like, well, I can't go back, but I didn't even find out. So about 2.5 months later, one of the kids that I'd been training and working with that went to school in the United States called me and was like, dude, did you hear what happened? And I was like, no, I haven't heard from anybody. So I was just assumed they were all mad at me. He was like, no, like these guys are in jail for 7 years in China. Yeah. And
for having weed there. Yeah.
That's it. And he was like, and they came like 2 days after my plane ticket was supposed to land back in Shenzhen to go back to work for ZQP. So that was like how I ended up just getting bounced out of the playing basketball space per se. And since then, that's what kind of I had to delve into new creativity in terms of training opportunities and kind of strength and conditioning. That's what started Sparkplug everything here. And I've played in pro-ams and such since. That's been really fun. But that's how I essentially landed here, was like this bizarre, like, and then I didn't find out till months later. So
wait, so
thank you,
are they
God.
still, do you know if they're not, hopefully they're not still in, you don't know.
I have no idea.
Wow.
Yeah.
Dude, it's kind of a similar story. I don't know if you heard about, did you hear about that recent story where there was a hunter that left a few of his rounds of ammunition in his bag and went to Turks and Caicos, and they detained him and his wife. They let the wife go, but he's being prosecuted right now. And I could be butchering this. I want to say, and Liz might be able to pull this up, I believe it's like 12 years. He's looking at jail time for bringing in, just like having a bag full of ammunition that, like, he didn't have a gun, he didn't have anything. He just had leftover ammunition.
He's gonna throw them at people. Like, I'm like, that's, oh man.
Yeah, dude, it's
crazy.
Bad. That's a crazy ass story. Wait, let's see. Liz pulling it up.
Yeah, here we go. Shout out to the Clippers and
dude, look at that.
Out on bail. There we go. He can't leave the country and has to check in a local police station twice.
Mandatory minimum sentence, 12 years. Dude, that's wild.
That's just crazy.
Minimum sentence of 12 years for having bullets, because and you know, look, like, the law is the law in that country, right? And it's the same thing like in China, for example. If you want to have, you know, marijuana, it kind of reminds me of that one. There was a basketball player, one of the WNBA players, who had a marijuana vape pen, right?
Yeah.
So, but dude, that's a gnarly story. I appreciate you sharing that.
Insane.
Yeah.
So you could. So I mean, not arguably,
I'd be rotten in there.
Yeah.
You could be in a Chinese jail. Instead, you're slinging collagen, helping basketball players, and you have two girls and an awesome wife.
Here we are.
Go, baby. Let's go.
God, that's exactly. And like, even like the way I got into it's so funny, because like I did this whole like vertical jump thing. I know Chandler, shout out to Liz and Chandler. Chandler had like really wanted me to tell the story, because I did CrossFit. Like, I'm one of those people, if you haven't gotten that I'm like, I can't dabble. I'm not a dabbler. I'm like 400% in to exactly what I'm doing. And so
my wife resonate with that so much.
I don't know how to just pretend like, and my wife is a big CrossFitter. She was amazing. She was motivating. And I was like, one, I'd never Olympic lifted, had no idea. I was a part of like that old school culture as a basketball player. The only thing that is going above my ears is a basketball. There's nothing else. Like, I had no reason to put anything above my head. And so my wife was at a big competition in Oklahoma called KO in the OK. And like, I was just supporting her, having fun, you know, like, go Paige, do your thing. She's amazing. And one of her teammates had hurt his wrist, and we all stay with friends in the city, and we've been playing board games, you know, just having fun, staying up late. Paige was fast asleep because she's a responsible CrossFitter. And anyways, I'd been 4 hours of sleep. I'm sitting there with like a hoodie up and like a C4, just scraggly in the stands. And my wife comes up to me. It's like 8:30 in the morning, first heat. And she's like, hey man,
hoodie and a C4.
I was just sick, like trying to make it. And my wife was like, no, Kevin's hurt. Like, we might not be able to do the event. And I was like, that sucks. No, she's like, no, you're going to do it. And I was like, no, I'm not doing it. Like, I don't even know what you're doing. And she was like, well, we're go at 8:54 and you need to start warming up. I was like, I don't even have clothes. Like, what do you want me to do for you in this CrossFit world? She's like, well, we had friends. Shout out to Kyle Smiley. I pretty much just wore his entire wardrobe, took his clothes off his back, got some shoes, and they essentially gave me Kevin's band. They're like, yeah, if you want to do it, do it. I was like, okay. So I asked them, what's the workout? I had 8 minutes. Don't speak CrossFit at all. They're like, okay, it's a waterfall workout, 3 guys, 3 girls teams, all in pairs, synchro toes to bar, synchro thrusters, and skiing. And I'm just like, first of all, what the hell is a toe to bar? Yeah. Second of all, what is a thruster and how I do them? And Bryce, who's the owner, one of the owners of Coda CrossFit, he was like, well, let's just talk fitness, you know? And we go down to like the bullpen. I'm like, I already feel miserable. And he's like, I see those people hanging, you know, like learn how to kip. And so I did like a crash course on toes to bar and thrusters in a matter. Like, I had front squatted before. So he was like, yeah, just front squat and push it over your head, push your head through. I was like, okay. Fortunately, it wasn't heavy enough. It was a 95-pound thruster. So I wasn't like getting hurt by anything crazy, but believe it or not, we actually did pretty good. My wife and I did the first like 3 rounds unbroken. And then I started cramping up really bad by round 4. And away I went pretty south after that. But that was like and then I was like, oh, that was kind of fun. And at that point, I had kind of done my last finale playing basketball and a bunch of pro-ams and stuff. So I was like, I'm just going to CrossFit as hard as I can. And so I like went nuts in CrossFit for like just shy of 2 years. And then I got very frustrated because I realized like CrossFit is such a volume sport. Like, because that's the most unique thing about it is it's like you have to be so good at so many things that like you need volume to support how good you are at so many things. And I just like, I was getting so mad because I didn't want to do anything else. I didn't want to go to my gym. I just wanted to CrossFit all the time. And it was like, I can't do that. So then I just had to like hard stop because I couldn't like have fun being like kind of good at it. So I like did 2 years aggressively. And then I did TFX at a competition and like Coda Norman, that's where I'm at. And down here is like the best. If anything, you want to talk about building community, I've never felt there's something about CrossFit and just like the death that comes with like a miserable Metcon or something where everybody just like lays down and wants to die. And we're like, oh, at least we did it, together. And so some of the best friends I've ever made was from that moment moving forward. But that was like my shout out to the CrossFit space for a short amount of time.
Oh man, dude, typical, dude. Yeah. That's awesome, man. Well, congrats on everything. And dude, I'm looking forward to checking in maybe 6 months, a year from now, see how things are going. I'm sure it's going to continue to evolve. That China story is awesome. We'll definitely put a link in the podcast show notes for your collagen and for your different like social feeds. But I just want to say I really appreciate your time today. It's been really fun. I do. Zephaniah, so Zeph, I know you go by Zeph, but what is the origin of your first name, Zephaniah?
Yeah, so it's actually a very small book in the Old Testament of the Bible. My parents are both like biblical seminary. They're phenomenal Bible heads and leaders. And so it means treasured by the Lord. And so when they found that out and pulled it out of the OT of the Bible. So
I thought there might be like an old biblical reference or maybe something from like I didn't know quite where, but yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's literally in most Bibles like 2.5 pages long. So if you ever want to dive into Zephaniah, you could probably get through it pretty quick. So
yeah, I feel like I can read that.
Yeah, a little micro page. Yeah. So
well, Gabe, any kind of closing remarks here?
Yeah, actually, can the Knicks beat the Celtics if they make it to the Eastern Conference Finals? Do they have any chance?
Oh yeah.
All right.
I think the Knicks are one of the few teams that are all bark and all bite at this point. They just got it. Philly's a tough out the way they're constructed with the two non-shooting bigs. Joel Embiid's a problem, but once you get through them, I think you're par for course. So.
All right. Feel good. That's it. That's what I needed to hear, Jay.
There you go.
I love it. Well, as per usual, we really appreciate you guys. Check out the podcast. It's been an awesome episode. We really appreciate Zeph. As like I said, if you could please leave us a rating, leave us a review. Let us know if this podcast has provided you value. Share it with your friends. Go back, check out all the other awesome episodes, and keep training hard.